Today's guest was first elected as councillor in the city of Kitchener in 2010. She was elected a councillor for Ward 4, the Pioneer Park Doon Ward. She represented the ward for 2 terms ending in 2018. Before becoming a councillor, she was employed as an educator, and she was a very active volunteer in the community. Some of her community involvement included the Kitchener Environmental Advisory Committee, the Grand River Environmental Network, various school committees, including even Air Cadets. She has a strong interest and activism in environmental issues, especially dealing with protecting green spaces and environmentally sensitive areas that may shelter threatened species. Currently, she is the community liaison with the Doon Pioneer Park Community Association and a vice president of the Kitchener Horticultural Society. And I'm pleased to have her here with us today to talk about her municipal council journey. Welcome, Yvonne Fernandes, to the Old Grey Mares podcast.
Thanks, Rob. And I'm going to make a quick correction. I'm no longer the vice president of the Horticultural Society. It was at that time just a bit too much.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. I mean, you've got grandkids to deal with now too, right?
Yeah, we've got twin grandchildren that live 5 minutes away from us, and another grandchild out in Edmonton who we're looking forward to seeing more of when we leave at the end of this month.
And how old are the twins?
2.
2 years old.
Testing twos, I always say.
Yeah. So, well, you know what? Is that your daughter? And
my daughter has she had a boy and a girl. And,
all right.
I mean, if you're going to have twins, what a nice way to kick off your family life is to get one of each.
Yeah, because you don't know any better, as I say, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, they're lucky. They're lucky to have you nearby. That's excellent. So, Yvonne, I wanted to touch on. It sounds like it was advocacy that brought you to politics, and of course, you've continued with your passion for community advocacy after politics. But let's talk about the before politics work you did in the community. So were you born and raised in the Kitchener area, or where do you hail from?
So I was born in the Netherlands and came over as I was a 3-year-old, and we moved a lot. We moved from Quebec area, moved into the Hamilton area, where there was a lot of Dutch people living in that area.
Right.
We moved to the Kitchener area. My biological father returned to the Netherlands, and then my mom remarried another Dutch gentleman from the southern part of the Netherlands.
So approximately when did you come to the Kitchener area then?
I was in about 11 because I was in grade 6, so I was 11.
Oh, okay. So your teenage years and onward were immersed in Kitchener.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so prior to your decision to run, what were some of the things you were involved with in the community? I know I listed a couple, but just give us a little more detail.
Yeah. So I guess my interest sort of started with what was happening literally in my backyard. So we back onto Strasburg Creek, and there was a meadow and a forest in behind us, and we really enjoyed living here. We really thought foolishly that we were moving to the edge of the city, as far as we could to the country without being in the country, because my husband was driving to Toronto every day. And so we really enjoyed having this environment. What happened was a few years afterwards, we started seeing red flags and stakes in the field in the area that we used to hike with the kids. And I started asking questions, and I found out within a short time that they were going to remove every tree back there. And in doing so, they created a situation where the black silt fence that they're supposed to put up to protect a water feature, a cold brook trout habitat like Strasburg Creek,
right?
It failed. And I happened to be walking the day that it failed. And so tons and tons of silt and sediment just flowed right into the creek.
You must have been horrified.
I was. I literally stood there and watched it fail and thinking, oh my gosh, this is catastrophic for the natural
Let me
area.
ask you, when you witnessed that at that particular time, did you have some knowledge, some background knowledge on environmental issues at that time, or
Um, a little bit, only because I had already become involved with the Grand River Environmental Network and was connected with Daphne and Gord Nichols, who were fighting to protect Hidden Valley. So I was starting to
okay,
learn on the fly
yeah,
what it means. So that really galvanized me. I called the city, I called Grand River, I was connected to MNR that came out and took a look at what was happening. And it resulted in a fine and a charge against Holloman Developments and MTE.
okay. Let me ask you, I just want to ask you for a second. So where this creek is located, is this sort of what we would describe as the dune area of Kitchener, or how would we describe this area?
Well, it actually originates west of here, up in that indigenous area that they've just found.
Yes, okay, that's over in the
Fisher-Hallman.
Bleams and Fisher-Hallman area.
Right.
Okay.
And it flows under there and into the Huron natural area, then under Huron Road. And we back onto the wood lot that would be, let's call it south of Huron Road.
Right,
And
okay.
then it flows further down into the Doon Village area, connects with Doon Creek.
So what did you reported this, ended up in fines. Did you do anything else from an activist perspective on this issue?
Yeah, so I was the key witness in the case against those.
Sure. I don't want to get into the case. I'm
Okay.
more like, did you galvanize the community? Did you gather people in your neighborhood? Those sorts of things.
Yeah, not for that necessarily. But I then became a member of the Kitchener Environmental Committee, because I knew that there was other things going on in this area through former regional councillor Halboom. That
Jean Halboom.
Jean Halboom, that's right. So that there were concerns about road extension, Strasbourg Road extension, and the impacts on the Waterloo Moraine and the countryside line and all the area of significance where Jefferson's salamander habitat.
Yes, and it's interesting you mentioned the road extension, because I've done a podcast with Jean, and we talked about, all we did was we talked about this road on a official plan that she saw, and the community advocacy over many long years to get that changed. It was sort of like a collector road. It was going to be a major collector road through the Doon area. I don't think enough people realize what we have in the Doon area generally. I don't think.
There are some really interesting, and the word jewel gets overused, but I would say significant in areas of interest within the Doon Pioneer Park area, because it was one of the first settlements in the area. And I'm sure that Jean would be able to talk about that way better than I can.
Yeah, but you were active there too. I mean, and sure, Homer Watson and all that, but you talk about brown trout creeks and those sorts of things. I mean, that's a pretty significant and special place.
Oh yeah, I think it's really beautiful. And the fact that there were settlements here, the fact that there were indigenous people here. Alder Creek was another area. There was a small community called Alder Creek that's off of Huron Road. And the area is, I think, not only just a heritage site, but also because of the Jefferson salamander habitat. And there's a number of other, there's a butternut tree, which people would say, well, what's a tree? It's not important. But all these indicator species show the indication of a good ecological and environmental area.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say that the Strasbourg Road extension, or the creek, there's a bit of a theme here, because it's part of your pre-council life, it's part of your council life, and it's part of your post-council life.
Yeah. It is.
This creek, it runs through your life. Analogy all around. Okay, so let's talk about your decision to run and how that came about. So I think, as we talked before, you and I, did you give some thought to running in 2006, but decided not to?
Yes, I was on the environmental committee at the time, and that was when people were asking me to consider running. And it just wasn't the right fit for my family at the time, because I was really committed. I knew that if I was going to be on council, I was I would see it as a full-time job. And I loved the part-time job I was doing as an educator.
Yep.
And so I just didn't see my way clear at the time. My husband was traveling a lot, and I thought, no, this is not.
I mean,
gonna work.
the other issue too, there was an incumbent there at the time running.
Yes.
You know, which and we all know it's sometimes difficult to run against an incumbent in an election, right? So, and who was the incumbent at that time?
Kelly Galloway Sealock now.
Right. Yeah. So Kelly was the incumbent at that time. And why were people asking you to run in before 06? Why was that?
I think just because of my advocacy around the environment. And, you know, I was involved at the school where my kids were going at the time. So I was starting to build a bit of a reputation.
Yes.
So I thought I think people thought that I was vocal enough that I could bring something to the table.
So you were not a shy fighter for issues that you believed in.
No, I'm not. I'm not the shy young girl I was.
At that time, you weren't a shy person, right? I mean, maybe you were when you were younger, but by that point, you felt you were a confident advocate on these issues.
That's right. Yeah, I was advocating for my children at school, and it just led from one thing to the next.
Yes. Were there issues at the school that you were advocating? Like we were talking about environmental issues. What were some of the issues at the school?
Well, I was working as a volunteer on the parent council, so I had some concerns around. We were going through all the teacher strikes that were happening in the 90s, and as a volunteer and working with children with special needs, yes. I never was a strong supporter of strikes because the impact is on the kids and families, and that never sat well with me.
And had you been involved in campaigns before 06?
No, I had no idea what a campaign looked like.
So 06, you decide for a variety of reasons, family considerations, incumbency and stuff. So decided not to run. And then what happened in 2010 then to make you decide the time was right?
So 2010, that's when a number of issues that were coming to the environmental committee, especially around Jefferson salamander, it really just pushed me harder because I felt even as a volunteer or coming to delegate to council, everything was falling on deaf ears. And I was watching more of council meetings, and I thought, you know what, I'm coming in the back door and coming in after the fact. I need that
is a very interesting point. So prior to 06, were you delegating to council as well during that time?
Yes, as a member of the environmental committee.
Right. Okay. So you had some experience then delegating to Kitchener Council, right?
I did. Yes.
And regional council too, or was it predominantly Kitchener Council you were delegating to?
You know what? I think when we did as a group, as a committee, we worked for a couple of years on the air quality report. And I believe we did present that to regional council as well.
Okay.
Because we had 55 recommendations and action items that we wanted to see, not only the city, but the region.
And I remember the salamander issue when I was a regional councillor from 2010 to 2014 and Hidden Valley. That the salamander, the Jefferson salamander, was a significant issue in trying to know what to do with respect to the salamander and construction, which really delayed things for quite a long period of time.
It did. Yeah. Yeah. So when I found out, so there was some suspicions around the habitat. Once I learned about the vernal ponds and the habitat of what is required for Jefferson salamander, there was a couple of members on the environmental committee, and we did a little bit of sleuthing. And during our sleuthing, a couple of biologists came out of the area that we were planning on doing a little walk around. And I said, why are you here? And they, well, you know, they sort of brushed us off. So we became quite, and you probably will find that article, we became quite adversarial at our next environmental committee meeting, saying, is there or is there not Jefferson salamander habitat in the Stauffer Woods area? And staff just danced around it, and finally somebody admitted, yes, there was. So we were, as a committee, we were quite flabbergasted that here we are, an advisory committee to the city council, and you're not even giving us the full story. How
Uh,
can we advise council on
right.
situations and issues, especially because there was a huge development planned in that area?
That's very interesting. So those biologists were working for the city of Kitchener, you suspect?
Either, whether it was the city, I would imagine the city of Kitchener, because I don't know the developer would have wanted that to come forward.
So these biologists were looking for that habitat, and you're right. Okay, and Stauffer Woods is what part of Kitchener is that?
It's the southwest part of Kitchener. It is south of Stauffer Drive and east of Rydell Drive.
But is that the Hidden Valley area, or is it the Doon area? What area are we talking about?
This would be it would be north of New Dundee Road. So if you think of where New Dundee Road is as it's going towards Fisher Hallman, but much closer to I guess you could see the 401 from there.
So all this is happening prior to 2010.
Yes.
Okay. So you're somewhat annoyed, angry about this?
Yeah. And I'm thinking, you know what? If I get on that council, man, I'm going to really push for.
Right. Okay. So this story raises two things. It raises, first off, respect for your community committees, your citizens committees. Why have them if you're not going to make them part of the process, a serious part of the process? Was that your observation?
Yes.
And then the second part of it is always wondering, as an outsider, like the committee is outside council, and always thinking when you're doing things, will council support this or not? What's council think about this? You know, and then suddenly one day you're elected, and now you are that person. And you know what one person on council thinks, because you are that person. Yeah. But so that was part of, I guess that was part of your motivation by 2010 then to run, was you felt disrespected?
Yeah, I wanted my community to be heard better. And if you're going to sit on an advisory committee, and these are all volunteers who give dozens and dozens of hours, and sometimes in the air quality report, hundreds of hours of their time. And something that they believe passionately about. And so if you're going to present something like that, then council needs to listen, because we have no vested interest, right? We're just because they're passionate.
You know, exactly what you're saying is a theme that comes up quite a bit from people who say they're going to run, because they feel like they aren't being listened to, they aren't being heard. It's like delegations that go to council, present, and then no one on council asks them a question.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And that's sort of, it's almost the height of disrespect in that situation, not to at least be asked a question, because you're spending all that time preparing and doing that sort of thing. So yeah, it's interesting, because Brenda Halloran tells a similar story about, trying to be heard on an issue and then eventually deciding to run, and she became mayor, yada, yada, yada. She became mayor, but yeah, that sort of thing. So in 2010, then you decide, okay, I'm going to put my name forward. What did you do? How was the campaign put together? How did you organize yourself?
So I have an amazing spouse. He, at the time, had just, his partnership had dissolved in his business, and he was the marketing guy. So, I couldn't have hired a better professional than my husband to market me. And we hit the pavement. We hit every single house, myself, my husband, and we had a team of about 7 or 8 people. Okay. And we just hit everybody, and then we went back again and targeted some specific areas. We talked to as many people as we possibly could, and had a fundraising barbecue at a gas station, which was very key, because there's a lot of people who are like, okay, what are you doing here?
So that got a lot of exposure, did it, for the community?
That and my 80-year-old mother, who stood on the corner waving us.
Wasn't for a car wash. It was for a barbecue. That's awesome. So it was a very grassrootsy family and some friends just getting out, knocking on doors. And by then, Kelly Galloway Seelock was not running in that ward at that time, right? She had moved to there was redistribution or something.
Yeah, they reconfigured the boundaries, and we went from 6 wards to 10 wards.
Okay. And then,
And so the lines were changed. And so that gave me a clear, open opportunity to present and to sell and market myself in that community.
and election day, you won. How many people were you running against?
I want to say 4. Florence Carberry, who has passed away since, Rod McNeil, and then I cannot for the life of me remember who the third person was, but there was 4 on the ballot.
So your experience then about what a councillor is, and you won election day, was it pretty handily that you won, or close?
I did win by a strong majority, and
good.
blew me away. It really does. Watching the results and afterwards, and I tell this story when I'm talking to journalist students. I literally went upstairs for a moment and went, "Oh my gosh,
Right? Yeah.
What to my life?"
Yes. What did I get myself into?
Yeah, exactly.
So, you watched council meetings. You attended council meetings, so that gave you an opportunity to observe the councillors in action. That's sort of how you learned to be a councillor. Was that part of it?
Yeah, but you know what, Rob, it is a baptism by fire, literally.
Right. Yes.
There's no course, and yes, you have an introduction. We had, because there were 7 new councillors on council. We spent a couple of days with Carla Ladd was the COO at the time, and just giving us a few days of introduction on basics, on just the policies, on
procedures,
Robert's Rules of Order.
So you had 7 new councillors in 2010. Out of how many? 7 out of how many were new? Like 7 new out of how many?
Out of 10.
Wow.
Because Carl Zayer was still
mayor.
Yep. And Barry still had his seat, and yep. John still had his seat. John Gazzola. Yeah. And Barry Vabanovich, and Kelly won in Ward 5.
Right.
Even though she changed wards, she was still an incumbent.
She's a veteran. Yeah. So those are the veterans on council at the time.
That's right.
Wow. That is a big change. So you have Ms. Ladd provide you with an intro, and it's important because you got 7 new people. So because you're basically jumping in to make decisions on things as soon as you're sworn in. But knowing now, what would you recommend to people who are just starting out and they've got elected as some of the key things that they should get up to speed on when they're starting out?
Well, I mean, if you're going to run, I think you need to be thinking about this a full year in advance. Watch council meetings, go to council meetings, follow agendas, follow the
sure, but I'm talking about you've been elected now, because obviously you did a lot of that, and there was still, you said you called it baptism by fire. How do I reduce the fire? That's what I want to know.
Okay. So I would say you really need to sit, if there's an incumbent, sit down with that councillor and find out what are the key issues at city council. Sit down with the heads of staff. So what city managers are with.
Okay, this is you as an elected councillor. You're chatting with an experienced councillor, and you're chatting with the various heads of the different departments, the staff people. Yeah,
exactly. And I think what's important is not just understanding procedures, because the clerk will always correct you if you're messing up on a procedure. But they did give us a lot of that information.
Okay.
But how to navigate with people, how to navigate with your constituents, how to meet with them, how to talk to them. When you go into a meeting and you're standing there outside, for example, I was meeting with a group of 40 plus people about a trail they didn't want. You literally feel like you're in a mob mentality. So how do you navigate that, right?
Right.
How do you read a report? Because a report, for the most part, is a repetitive component. Most of it is a template. So where do you look for the real juicy bits of the information? How do you understand that?
And you mentioned that because your councillor packages can be how many pages long?
Oh gosh, sometimes hundreds.
Easily hundreds, most
Easily.
often hundreds, right? I mean, most
Yeah.
often it's hundreds of pages long. And you get that package how long before a council meeting?
When I was on council, it was coming in on Friday afternoons for a Monday meeting.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that was something I could not understand. How do you expect us to understand all these studies, reports, backgrounds, and have nobody to question until Monday?
Yeah. And then be at council and question and appear intelligent on
Yeah,
the issues,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
because you come to it as an educator with a strong interest in the environment, but there's a whole range of issues that you're dealing with beyond the environment that you
Oh,
have
yeah.
to get up to speed on.
Yeah. Yeah. And finance was not my strong suit. And so, I was very fortunate, and I had a community member help me understand some finance, but it still took me a couple of years before I understood what budgets meant and what financial statements meant. And
Would you say the budget is the key document, isn't it, in a council?
it's a guiding document.
In that sense, yes, it's a guiding document. Because if it's
Yeah.
not in the budget, they're not spending money on it.
No, but there are lots of pots of money that are sitting in reserves that I often think, why are we not, being flexible?
Sure, you're talking about during the year especially, but if it's not in the budget, it's hard to get that flexibility, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. I mean, once you're out of the budget, other councillors are sometimes a little more difficult to agree to spend that money out of those reserve pots. And I agree with you. There are reserves out there, and that's the people's money, and it should be spent on what the people need.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
definitely.
trying to get it sometimes. Okay. So you say go talk to an experienced councillor, go talk to staff. Is that what you did when you first got elected?
Yeah, I met with Kelly, and I have to be frank. She said this is an issue that you should be aware of, but there was no more guidance. There was no more. I would have happily sat with her for an entire day and said, let's go through the reports. Let's go through how to understand. How do I question without looking like an idiot?
Right. So you met with the previous councillor, which was her, to talk about what are the outstanding issues that may not have come up during a campaign or what have you, or that you weren't aware of. And you would have liked to have a little more time with a mentor to talk about the basic fundamentals of being a councillor.
What I didn't want to hear, and this is what I heard, is the budget is the budget, or it is what it is. Staff reports are what staff reports are. No, I'm sorry.
So there's no, you wanted to say, hey, why are we always doing it this way? Can we do it a different way?
Yes. Yeah.
And you met resistance for that.
A lot of resistance. Yeah. Our meetings should only be this many hours. Well, the more questions you ask, the longer the meetings go, and that's not necessarily moving things forward. But
that's what I was going to get at. When you get this package, I mean, first of all, you got to get up to speed on it, so you don't have time. And the council meetings are what, Mondays or Tuesday nights or what?
Monday nights. Well, everything goes to committee first, right?
Right. So committee first, which is a Monday or what have you.
Yeah.
And so still, whatever it is, it's your first opportunity is Monday. So it's really the only opportunity, or the first opportunity you have to ask questions.
Exactly.
Before you actually vote on things.
That's right.
Because it was always funny to me, like everybody, the committees meet, but it's everybody from council on the committees, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And then it's like sober second thought, I guess, where you're supposed to go to a meeting of the whole, the general council, which is again all the same people, and vote on it a second time as if there's going to be a change, which rarely happens because you kind of voted one way already. And it's rare that you're going to change your vote by the time you get to the meeting of the whole.
That's true. Yeah.
That was always something I had to learn about, because it always seemed to me, it seemed redundant that you had that second meeting. But still, so you don't have a lot of time, and then there's criticism for asking questions because you are presumed to be prolonging a meeting.
Right. Yeah. And it became quite an issue, because I'd have a whole list of questions. And, then eventually what ended up happening is a decision was made that we would set a policy that you could only ask questions for 5 minutes. and then you would go on to the next person, and you would have a second kick at the can once
Right.
everybody else had asked questions. And yes, then sometimes people ask questions that you had, so you could strike them off your list.
Right.
But you maybe wanted a clarification, or you wanted to be a little bit fully understanding why that money was going to be spent, or why.
Did you feel that, so that was a policy or procedure change? Was that made in reference to something you were doing on council?
Oh, absolutely. I think it was because, well, first of all, we had 7 newbies. So many of them were asking more questions than the previous council, who had been
Sure.
6 and been there forever and ever.
You don't have the experience. Yeah, exactly.
Right. And if there had been a way, so in the end, they did finally, even though they told us they could not publish the agenda sooner, they could not send it out to us sooner. We did get it pushed, and we were starting to receive it, I think, on Wednesdays, and it was published on Thursdays.
And that seems far more reasonable, at least to have the extra few days. What they expect, then I guess your weekend was gone as you're reviewing all of this and doing everything else. People don't realize when they say it's a part-time position, it's far from a part-time position. When you start to look at all not only the packages that you get and the decisions you have to make on all of that and getting up to speed and all that, but the community events that happen, or people in the community that want to talk to you about issues, it easily extends it to full-time or more. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. My husband used to joke that I would be putting in 60-hour weeks. He goes, "Oh, you're putting in almost as much as me, who own my own business."
Yeah. And getting paid part-time wages. During that first term, what were, do you recall? Like, I know you've had various issues. There was community tech funding was an issue. Doon Pioneer Park expansion was an issue. Did those things come up during your first term? I was just curious what came up during some of the things that might have, if you can recall. I'm not sure if you can recall.
So the expansion did come up during my first term, and it was delayed.
Okay, well, let's talk about the expansion for a second then. Okay. So it's interesting because the issue on the expansion was similar to the issue I dealt with. And actually it was a community center that brought me to politics. And one of the issues that came up was a cost overrun on that community center. And I see that in the articles that I read prepping for today, that there were issues about the quotes being much higher than was budgeted for the project. And Doon Pioneer Park Community Center would have been important to you, right? You were active there.
It really needed to be expanded, and it had been delayed a number of times. And the tenders that come in, I guess I was basing a lot of my experience from my husband when he would put a quote into a client, and if it was an overrun, well, his business ate it, not the client.
Right.
The city situation, the city eats it. And I used to say, well, wait a minute, if you are committed to spending $2.5 million on an expansion, and it was way more than that, then that's it. You got to suck it up, Buttercup.
I think, okay, well, let's step back for a sec. So the city anticipates what the costs might be before they get the tenders. And then the tenders come in from, in this case, there were 3 groups that provided tenders, and all of them were over what the city thought it was going to cost.
That's right. Yes.
So I guess then the issue is, if you want someone to build it, that's what you're going to have to pay.
Yeah, that's true. But the other issue that I was concerned about, and this came to light when I was asking questions around the word escapes me for a minute, an agreement we had with the Masons.
Oh, okay. Yes.
That was set in 1984.
Right.
Because a councillor was a Mason.
Okay, but we'll get on that another issue. I just want to focus on Doon for a second.
Yeah,
so in this case, though, I mean, if you get 3 quotes, then you've got to deal with the quotes you get. Now, I agree with you. If you sign a contract with somebody and then they come back to you later after you sign the contract, then that's an issue. That's where I think that's more like what your husband's situation is. He agrees to do work at a certain amount, and if it costs him more, he eats that because he agreed to a certain amount.
Exactly.
What we find, though, in some of these municipal contracts is there's clauses that allow for extra money to be approved because it's starting to cost more, and that's something that could be an issue. But on this, I mean, there could be issues with respect to closed shop. You can only use unionized laborers, that sort of thing, that drive up the cost. But in this case, the original quote that came from one company, the lowest bidder, was 1.14 million over budget.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then you had to go back and look at the design, right, to see if there's things you could cut to get it closer to the quote or the amount you anticipated spending, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. So then changes in the design and changes in the way and extra amenities like the splash pad was removed at one point, and then the height of the gym was reduced.
Reduced, yeah. So the splash pad was saved though, wasn't it?
It was saved because I made a request that the money that the whole budgeted amount for the skateboard park, which
right,
was supposed to be went from an intermediate to a higher level skateboard park.
Yes.
I asked if we could have an intermediate skateboard park, and that money, the difference, was brought over to the community center so that we
right.
can have a splash pad.
Yeah. So in your budget, you had approved, I think it was about $4 million for a 9,000 square foot addition. Mm-hmm. And that's the dollar amount. That's the envelope that you have for this. Then you send out the tender and you get these tenders back and they're like, well, 1.14 million over budget. Mm-hmm. And you say, what do we do? So now you go back and look at the project to see if there's things that you can cut to still have some expansion. Did the lower ceiling, did it stay high, or was it a lower ceiling at the end of the day in the gym?
It was lowered.
In the gym. So you couldn't play volleyball in the gym then?
Yeah, you can because
okay.
They did finagle something in the way the design.
All right. Okay. So, okay. So, but one of the things I found interesting though was, and this is the real crux to this story, and this gets back to our conversation just a minute ago about pots or whatever, right? Or where do you find the money? Does it come from a reserve? Does it come from another project? So you got to make choices. You have to convince your fellow councillors to agree to that change, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And what was that process like?
That was tough.
Right.
I had to bring on, I was starting to get some alliance with John Gazzola and Zyganetsky. And I appealed to Kelly because she was the former councillor for the area, as was John Gazzola pre her, because it was a split where the boundary was.
Yep.
And of course, the community members, the Doon Pioneer Park Board was really working hard on trying to convince council that we really did need it. We were growing very, very quickly. And so I think it was a real partnership in how we were able to convince enough council to support.
Yeah, so you had to do some advocacy, almost drawing on your skills from before, if you were a councillor, to convince the other councillors. And was it unanimous?
I don't feel like it was.
Yeah, but you had to pull. So did you pull the money from the skateboard project? Is that where it came from?
For the splash pad, yes. And I believe the board offered some additional funds as well for some amenities.
Yes, I think you're right. I think the board offered about 80,000. So it was a community, multifaceted plan. And I think you needed about 550,000 from Kitchener Council to approve to get that project done. But I think it's a good example of showing how you need to work with the other councillors, right, in order to get what you need. The other small little story I saw, because I remember this, was that pond ice rink.
Oh yes.
That's a little bit of Kitchener folklore, I guess we could touch on. Was this storm water management pond that was not one of the 30 plus outdoor rinks that the city of Kitchener administered or what have you, but it was a local group of people. And then they woke up one day to see was it a heavy machinery breaking up their rink?
Up their ice rink. Yes. Yeah.
So tell me about that.
I think it was a couple of phone calls and messages that came in, and I thought, what the heck is going on? So I drove out there to see, and as I would, and I was shocked because they had really done a magnificent job of setting it up and clearing it all off. And I kept thinking, this is Canada. This is what many of us have grown up with is pond skating.
Yep.
And I looked into some of the background about stormwater ponds. Yes, some of them have warm water coming in on them, but that was a really cold winter. And the people assured me that they had gone out by themselves and checked everything out and did a auger drilling. They had done a lot to really ensure.
Sure. They were maintaining it. They were flooding it. They were building up the ice on top of the pond. And it wasn't, was it the first year they'd had that, or was it multiple years?
I think it may have been a few years before, but this, for some reason, this came, somebody complained, and that's often what happens. If somebody complains, it escalates it to bylaw, it escalates it to whoever.
Well, bylaw generally operates on a complaint basis, right? If nobody complains, bylaw generally is not going to follow up on it. And so the people got a letter that day that it was going to be scheduled maintenance, and the next thing you know, those heavy equipment was in there breaking it up. I guess you might have, did you take a lot of blowback from the community on this issue?
Well, because I was siding with them. They were more angry at the fact that operations were, in their opinion, wasting time and machinery on something that was pretty lame. And that they, as a community, a group who were taking care of it, were taking responsibility.
Did you try to get it reopened or allowed or permitted at all?
I did. I brought forward a motion that we, first of all, suggest waivers. So again, I mean, we have signs at all our stormwater management ponds saying, don't swim here, use at own risk kind of thing. So I said that this is Canadiana, guys. This is where everybody grew up to learn how to skate. And we had only one other ice rink, I think, on Green Valley, because I'm trying to think if I don't even know if Doon, if the community center had
right.
So I said, let's do something more positive. Let's community build here.
So staff wasn't supporting you though, were they?
No, absolutely not. No, stormwater management ponds are not intended to be used for anything.
So you brought a motion to council to allow that rink to go ahead. Did you have a seconder for that motion?
That's a good, you know what, I have to really think. I think I did.
Well, was there a vote? Was there a vote on the motion?
Yeah, it failed.
Yeah, so you had a seconder, but so the other councillors basically said, no, we're not going ahead with it.
No, we're not going to allow any stormwater management ponds to ever be a pond skating area for people.
But let me ask you this, okay? This sort of brings up an issue. In municipal politics, there are no party politics. Okay, so you're not, I mean, you could have a party that you're affiliated with, you could have conservative thinking, liberal thinking, NDP thinking, whatever thinking. But when you come to the horseshoe or the table, you're one individual working with other groups of individuals who have all been individually elected. The mayor's the only one that's been elected citywide. And so you bring to it your own unique experiences, background. But in order to get something done, at that time, there were, how many councillors were there in total, including the mayor? Like 11 people, was it?
It was 11 people, yeah.
10 or 11? Yeah. Okay.
11 including the mayor, so 10.
Okay. Councillors. So 10 councillors and the mayor, that's 11 people. You need to get 6 people to side with you to get what you need done.
That's right.
And if you don't get 6, then you're pushing a stone up a hill kind of thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that was often, especially in my second term, exactly what I felt I was doing, pushing the stone up the hill, hitting a brick wall.
But but in your first term, you would have learned that dynamic in your first term, right?
You know what? The first 2 years, I felt like we were all wanting to make big change.
Okay.
But by the third year, there were alliances that were starting to become very evident, and very pro-development group, people who were more interested in community building, and people who had their own personal agendas.
Well, okay. Well, when you say community building, that's different than pro-development?
Yes.
Okay. So what do you mean by community building then, in that sense? So you're not talking about building apartment buildings and
no
commercial plazas.
I'm talking about hearing what your community wants and needs. what they're seeing, because you know what, if you're saying delegations always get hit with a, well, you're not the expert. And my comment would be to my community and at council is they are the expert in their community. They know the way the cars travel. They know where people walk. They know what trails are being used, what amenities are missing in their community. They're the experts. So let's listen to what they have to say.
So your first term on council, the first few years, it felt like working together, and then you felt that started to change a bit during the second half.
They did, yeah. There was more resistance.
After that, as that first term was going, you decided to run again for a second term?
Yes, they did. I thought, you know what, let's see, maybe there'll be a change on council. Maybe one can always hope that your adversaries are voted out and a new incumbent is voted in.
Yeah. And did somebody run against you in that second election?
Yes, Wayne Buckholtz ran against me. He was a school board trustee and a high school principal.
Well, I know Wayne. He was I remember he was the principal in at Blessed Sacrament, or not Blessed Sacrament, at St. Bridget in Ayr. And my kids were going when that school first opened up as a Catholic elementary school. So I know Wayne. So I don't think he won though, right? Because he ended up on school board or something.
He was, later. I believe he was a school board trustee.
Oh, he was on the school board beforehand. Okay.
Beforehand, yeah.
All right.
I mean, he did a lot of community things. He tutored kids at the library, and you know, kudos for him for volunteering his time.
What were some issues that you dealt with in that campaign? Does anything come to mind?
Well, certainly the Conestoga College student issue and
we'll talk about that. Yeah, we'll talk about that. Yes.
Yeah. And I think the fact that I wasn't a consensus builder.
When you say that, you're talking about consensus builder on council.
Right.
And that gets back to my point. If you want anything done, it seems you have to have consensus. But if you're seen as the outsider, are you seen as the troublemaker?
Oh, yes. That was a word that was thrown around a few times.
Oh, that word was thrown around? I just threw that out. I didn't know that. I just threw it out there now. Oh, man, I feel bad.
Troublemaker, toxic. Yeah, those are a few of the words that were.
Because you would question things.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I felt you can't just sit at council and nod your head.
You can't you shouldn't have to conform. You should be able to raise the issues that are important and have a discussion about them.
Exactly. It doesn't necessarily mean that we all have to agree, but let's at least have a conversation about it.
Yeah. I did a podcast with Mike Murray earlier on. I think it's number 25 or something. Mm-hmm. And we talked about the dynamic between counselors and staff. Yeah. And one of the things was, if you're a counselor and want to get something done, like let's say you want staff to do a report, you have to get the consensus or the majority of the number of counselors to agree to allow you to get staff to do that report on an issue that you want them to investigate.
That's right. Yes.
So consensus is a very big deal.
It is a big deal, but I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to always be to cave in,
Right.
And I mean, I don't know if that's what lost me the support from the rest of council or a number of councillors. But I think that the issues I was bringing forward were really important, not just to my ward, but also to the overall.
And you started to feel that near the end of your first term?
Near the end of the first term, but not significantly, but definitely within the first year of my second term.
Right. And so in the election then, was it a close one you had with Wayne at the end of the day? I mean, you were the incumbent now, so that must have helped a little bit.
It did. I would say I got double the votes of what he got.
Okay. And during your first term, how did you maintain contact with your constituency?
On my bike, a lot. On my bike, I would bike everywhere.
Good for you. Nice.
And I would just stop and talk to people on my bike, on the trails, the grocery store. If people approached me, that's fine. I held Meet Your Counselor evenings at the community center. I participated in programs at the community center. So people saw me all the time.
Yeah. And that's important. I know Regional Chair Ken Sealing at the time, like he always made a point of going to as many events as he could because it was the best way to find out what was happening in your community. It's a great way to do that. Okay, so sorry, go ahead.
just that saying that the community events that I always felt were important to attend were the ones that were grassroots ones.
Mhm.
You know, there's always the big highfalutin
Oh,
ones.
sure.
Yeah, I attended some of them, but I should by the third year of my first time, I was like, you know what? These are not important. These are not the people that voted me in.
Right. Yeah, it's yeah, I understand what you're saying. So you were starting to hone in on what to you as a counselor felt were the important people, not important people, but the important meetings you should go to really understand what was happening, because you're representing that ward.
Yeah.
And want to know what's happening in the ward. So second term, you're dealing with the rental licensing issue.
Mhm.
And I was reading up on it because, you know, you've got Conestoga College, you've got the homes there that are being converted to student housing, and it seems to be quite rampant and happening a lot. During the campaign, was that an issue during the campaign?
Oh, it really was. It was very intense because we hadn't moved the needle forward at all. I did attempt to bring a rental licensing bylaw forward, similar to what Waterloo had.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a sec. But during the campaign, that issue came up. So you identified that as something that needs to be addressed because the people in the community were talking to you about that?
Yes.
What were their concerns? They use like noise, garbage, those sorts of things?
Noise, garbage, safety about students. You know, they were cramming students in a house that would be perfectly fine for 6 people. All of a sudden there were 8 people, there were 10 people. And the difference between a family living in a house of 6 or 8 is that you're cooking breakfast, lunch, dinner. Right. 8 different people, 8 different schedules.
8 different hot plates.
Yeah, 8 different hot plates, 8 different hair dryers. The ventilation isn't.
Yeah, fire code, absentee landlords, that sort of thing.
Yes. Yeah.
So I thought when I was reading about this, I thought, wow, this sounds reasonable. You know, you want to, because as a politician, as an elected politician, I think you'll agree with me. The number one issue you have to deal with is the safety of your constituents. That is above all issues. That really is the guiding principle of what you do.
Yes. Yeah.
And so this is, and the licensing is not a money grab by the city, but an opportunity for the city to make sure that the housing is safe.
That's right. And to hold landlords accountable to how they're housing these young people.
Exactly. All about safety. But I was surprised that there wasn't support for this.
No, there wasn't support for this for, I think, 2 reasons. One, most on council saw it as a geographical issue. They didn't see, like Kelly didn't see that it was happening in Ward 5, and Zig wouldn't have seen it happening, even though he supported me, in Ward 7 or Ward 8. I had to bring it forward, but they said, if we bring it forward, it could go to the Ontario Human Rights Commission, because the Human Rights Commission had said.
I saw that. I couldn't understand how that would go to the Human Rights Commission, because you're a governing body trying to create a safe living for people. And I wasn't sure how that would go to did they say why it would go to the Human Rights Commission?
Yes, because they had come out with a document saying that we couldn't people zone. So you can't tell people where to live. So if you decide to rent your basement to a student and then, rent another room to a student, we have no right to tell people, oh, you can't do that. Or you buy an investment property and rent it to.
Didn't Waterloo have a licensing program?
They did, but they put it through the whole entire city, because of course they've got thousands more students than we did at that time at Conestoga College.
All right.
And Conestoga College was maintaining they were a community college. They're no longer a community college. They're drawing students internationally.
Well, regardless of what they are, there's students coming in and being put in houses that are not safe.
Yeah. But according to the.
Doesn't matter what you call yourself.
I know.
It shouldn't matter what you call yourself.
Yeah. Well, the president said it was not their problem where students were housed. They were there to educate. Yeah,
fine. They can educate, but housing is your issue. It's not his issue. President can do what he wants on his property, but this is outside of his property. These weren't houses on college lands.
No.
So it's very interesting. So that got defeated as well, right?
It did. Yeah.
So by the end of your second term, how are you feeling about being a councillor?
You know what, I was really frustrated. I felt like a lone wolf many times. The hen in the the hen in the hen house with the fox at the door.
Right.
And I wasn't feeling like I was doing anything good for my community anymore. Any motions I brought forward either didn't get on the floor or got turned down. And I was also very keen on all the advisory committees I was sitting on. And then I started to hear, oh, you're here again. Well, yes, of course I'm here. I'm your city rep on the advisory committee.
Yeah.
And when I started to really look into it and saw the number of councillors who were not attending advisory committees, where we hold our volunteers to a standard of attending, and we were okay with councillors not attending, even though they were vying for those positions on whatever advisory committee they wanted.
Oh, okay. So there's a bit of a competition to get on certain advisory committees, but now you're back to your original sort of first love, which was the environmental committee you were on, and the importance you felt of the work you were doing on that environmental committee, and how it should be reflected in the councillors that are there to be attending those things.
Yeah.
So Yvonne, yours is I would say, a cautionary tale about the joys and disappointments of being an elected official and the quote team approach.
Yes, I would say it is. It is. We're all going to want to make a change in the world. I think if you're going to run for an elected position, you're there because you're really passionate about something. Can you go in with your eyes wide open? I don't think so. I think it's really difficult to be completely aware of what's happening and the interplay between councillors and staff and decisions and motions. So yeah, be aware that if you are running, that you are going, unless you are 100% with everybody else, you're going to get resistance, which is in the normal scheme of things. That's what democracy is about. Right.
Yeah, it's democracy, but there's politics there. And in your case, you got worn down by the politics.
I did. Yeah.
Well, listen, you're still a strong advocate in the community. You're still working on that Strasbourg Road extension issue and the creeks and a good steward of the environment. So listen, I want to thank you for having been on the podcast today and sharing your story. I really appreciate it. I think you've brought a very unique perspective and a bit of a different perspective and an important one. So thanks, Yvonne, for being here today.
Well, thank you, Rob. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and to share my experiences with whoever listens to your podcast.
Yeah, whoever. Take care. Okay, just see you. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to another edition of the Old Grey Mares podcast. If you have any ideas for stories or people you would like us to interview or reach out to, please feel free to contact us. And thank you again.